Okay, tell me.
I've got a square head, and a real ghost has a round one. All we have to do is make my head round and boo! I'm scary!
Okay, are you ready?
Remember, like this.
You sure you want to do this?
Why, hello there, friends, and welcome to my home.
Let's get to it.
I'm Lord Midnight, and I will be your host tonight. I assume you're all here for one of my midnight stories.
Perfect.
Well,
Now that's
you're in luck,
scary.
because I have one just for you, my friends.
Scare somebody.
Have you ever heard of the show Spongebob Squarepants? You know, the cartoon about the cute, lovable sponge that everyone likes. But what if I told you the show had a dark secret that the creators tried to hide from everyone?
The Flying Dutchman's back.
Our story tonight is about that secret. Without further ado, I give you Squidward Suicide.
Oh boy, that was something. Your costume really.
I hope you're not afraid of a little ghost story.
No question. You scared the barnacles off that.
Look, I just want to start off by saying, if you want an answer at the end, prepare to be disappointed. There just isn't one. I was an intern at Nickelodeon Studios for a year in 2005 for my degree in animation. It wasn't paid, of course, most internships aren't, but it did have a few perks beyond education. To most adults it may not seem like a big one, but to most kids at the time would go crazy over it. Now, since I worked directly with the editors and animators, I got to view the new episodes days before they aired. Got right into it without giving too many unnecessary details. They had very recently made the Spongebob movie, and the entire staff was somewhat sapped of creativity at the time, so it took them longer to start up the season. But the delay lasted longer for more upsetting reasons. There was a problem with the season 4 premiere that set everyone and everything back for several months. Me and 2 other interns were in the editing room, along with the lead animators and sound editors for the final cut. We received a copy that was supposed to be Fear of the Krabby Patty and gathered around the screen to watch it. Now, given that this isn't final yet, animators sometimes put up mock title cards, sort of an inside joke for us, with phony, oftentimes lewd titles such as How Sex Doesn't Work instead of Rockabye Bye Val when SpongeBob and Patrick adopt a sea scallop. Nothing particularly funny, but work-related chuckles. So when we saw the title card, Squidward Suicide, we didn't think more of it than a morbid joke. As a matter of fact, one of the interns did a small throat laugh at it. The happy-go-lucky music plays as normal. The story begins with Squidward practicing his clarinet, hitting a few sour notes like normal. We hear SpongeBob laughing outside, and Squidward stops, yelling at him to keep it down because he has a concert that night and needs to practice. SpongeBob says okay and goes to see Sandy and Patrick. The bubble splash scene comes up and we see it's the end of Squidward's concert. That's when things begin to seem off. While playing, a few frames repeat themselves, but the sound doesn't. At this point, sound is synced up with the animation, so yes, that's not common, but when he finishes playing, the sound finishes as if the skip never happened. There's a slight murmuring in the crowd before they begin booing him. Not normal cartoon booing that's common in the show, but you can very clearly hear malice in it. Squidward is in full frame and looks visibly afraid. The shot goes to the crowd and SpongeBob in center frame, and he too is booing, very much unlike him. But that isn't the oddest thing though. What's odd is everyone has hyper-realistic eyes, very detailed. Not shots of real people's eyes, but something a bit more real than CGI. Their pupils are red. Some of us looked at each other, obviously confused, but since we weren't the writers, we didn't question its appeal to children yet. Shot goes to Squidward sitting on the edge of his bed, looking very forlorn. The view outside his porthole window is of a night sky, so it isn't that far long after the concert. The unsettling part is, at this point, there is no sound. Literally, no sound. Not even from the speakers in the room. It's as if the speakers were turned off, though their status showed them working perfectly. He just sat there, blinking in silence for 30 seconds. Then he started to sob softly. He put his tentacles over his eyes and cried quietly for a full minute more. All the while, a sound in the background very slowly growing from nothing to barely audible. It sounded like a slight breeze through a forest. The screen slowly begins to zoom in on his face. By slowly, I mean only noticeable if you look at shots 10 seconds apart side by side. His sobbing gets louder, more full of hurt and anger. The screen then twitches a bit, as if it twists in on itself for a split second, then back to normal. The wind through the tree sounds gets slowly louder and more severe, as if a storm is brewing somewhere. The eerie part is the sound and Squidward's sobbing. It sounded real, as if the sound wasn't coming from the speakers, but as if the speakers were holes the sound was coming through from the other side. As good as sound as the studio likes to have, they didn't purchase the equipment to be that good to produce sounds of that quality. Below the sound of wind and sobbing, very faint, something sounded like laughing. It came at odd intervals and never lasted more than a second, so you had a hard time pinning it. We watched the show twice, so pardon me if things sound too specific, but I've had time to think about them. After 30 seconds of this, the screen blurred and twitched violently. Something flashed over the screen, as if a single frame had been replaced. The lead animation editor paused and rewound frame by frame. What we saw was horrible. It was a still photo of a dead child. He couldn't have been more than 6. His face had been mangled and bloodied, one eye dangling over his upturned face, popped. He was naked down to his underwear, and his stomach had been crudely cut open and his entrails laying beside him. He was laying on some pavement that was probably a road. The most upsetting part was that there was a shadow of a photographer. Except there was no crime tape, no evidence tags or markers, and the angle was completely off to be a shot designed for evidence. It would seem the photographer was the person responsible for the child's death. We were of course mortified, but pressed on, hoping that this was just a sick joke. The screen flipped back to Squidward, still sobbing, louder than before, and half body in frame now. There was now what appeared to be blood running down his face from his eyes. The blood was also done in a hyper-realistic style, looking as if you touched it, you'd get blood on your fingers. The wind sounded now as if it were that of a gale, blowing through the forest. There were even snapping sounds of branches. The laughing. A deep baritone, lasting at longer intervals and coming more frequently. After about 20 seconds, the screen again twitched and showed a single frame photo. The editor was reluctant to go back. We all were. But he knew we had to. This time, the photo was that of what appeared to be a little girl, no older than the first child. She was laying on her stomach, her barrettes in a pool of blood next to her. Her left eye was too popped out and popped, naked except for underpants. Her entrails were piled on top of her, above another crude cut along her back. Again, the body was on the street, and the photographer's shadow was visible, very similar in size to the first. I had to choke back vomit, and one intern, the only female in the room, ran out. The show resumed. About 5 seconds after the second photo played, Squidward went silent, as did all sound, like it was when the scene started. He pulled his tentacles down and his eyes were now done in hyperrealism, like the others were in the beginning of the episode. They were bleeding, bloodshot and pulsating. Then he just stared at the screen, as if he was watching us. After about 10 seconds, he started sobbing, this time not covering his eyes. The sound was piercing and loud, the most fear-inducing of all his sobbings mixed with screams. Tears and blood were now dripping down his face at a heavy rate. The wind sound came back, and so did the deep voice laughing. And this time, a still photo lasted for a good 5 frames. The animator was able to stop it on the 4th, and backed up. This time the photo was of a boy, about the same age, but this time the scene was different. The entrails were being pulled out from a stomach wound by a large hand. The right eye popped and dangled, blood trickling down. The animator proceeded. It was hard to believe. The next one was different, but we couldn't tell what. He went on to the next. Same thing. He went back to the first and played them quicker. And I lost it. I vomited on the floor. The animating and sound editors gasped at the screen. 5 frames were not as if they were 5 different photos. They were played out as if they were frames from a video. We saw the hand slowly lift out the guts. We saw the kid's eyes focused on. We even saw 2 frames of the kid beginning to blink. The lead sound editor told us to stop. He had to call the creator to see this. Mr. Hillenberg arrived within about 15 minutes. He was confused as to why he was called down there, so the editor just continued the episode. Once a few frames were shown, all screaming, all sound again stopped. Squidward was just staring at the viewer, full frame of face, for about 3 seconds. The shot quickly panned out and that deep voice said, "Do it!" And we see in Squidward's hands a shotgun. He immediately puts the gun in his mouth and pulls the trigger. Realistic blood and brain matter splattered the wall behind him and his bed, and he flies back with the force. The last 5 seconds of the episode show his body on his bed, on his side, one eye dangling of what's left of his head above the floor, staring blankly at it. Then the episode ends. Mr. Hillenberg is obliviously angry at this. He demands to know what the hell is going on. Most people left the room at this point, so it was just a handful of us to watch it again. Viewing the episode twice only served to imprint the entirety of it on my mind and cause horrible nightmares. I'm sorry I stayed. The only theory we can think of was the file was edited by someone in the chain from the drawing studio to here. The CTO was called in to analyze when it happened. The analysis of the file did show it was edited over by new material. However, the timestamp was a mere 24 seconds before we began viewing it. All equipment involved was examined for foreign software and hardware, as well as glitches, as if the timestamp may have glitched and showed the wrong time, but everything checked out fine. We don't know what happened, and to this day, no one does. There was an investigation due to the nature of the photos, but nothing came of it. No child scene was identified, and no clues were gathered from the data involved, nor physical clues in the photos. I never believed in unexplainable phenomenons before, but now that I have something happened and I can't prove anything about it beyond anecdotal evidence, I now think twice about things. I'll bet you'll never watch Spongebob the same way again. Well, that's all the time we have for tonight, my friends. And don't be sad. Remember, I'll always be here, waiting to tell you another story. Until next time, my friends, I'm Lord Midnight, and I wish you a good night's sleep.